Hello and welcome back to Ruben Uncut. It's finally happened. I liked Glenn Powell in a movie. All right, so of course, obviously, I'm here to review The Running Man, the new movie by Edgar Wright, an adaptation of the novel by Stephen King, not a remake of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, which itself was also an adaptation of the book by Stephen King. Now, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, apparently, however, a film I must give full disclosure, I've never seen. I would watch it, but apparently it's streaming on MGM Plus, which, side note, Amazon, you own MGM. Why does MGM Plus exist? Put all that shit on Amazon. What are we doing? Just making us pay for extra services. That's what they're doing. I'm not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the new Running Man, which I have seen, and frankly, I found quite enjoyable. The new Running Man is, of course, a dystopian action comedy thriller following Glenn Powell, a man who's being absolutely oppressed by capitalism. Because, as we can tell from some of Stephen King's works, he's not a fan of capitalism. Although, in fairness to that statement, it's almost impossible to fully criticize the United States or its culture without at the same time also criticizing or examining capitalism on some level. It's just, they're so intertwined. One could make the argument that any sort of satire of American culture is also going to be a satire, commentary, or criticism of capitalism due to, the fact that it's woven into the very fabric of our society. If you don't like capitalism, don't participate. Well, that's not a choice. In the movie, Glenn Powell plays a character named Ben Richards, which I'm not going to lie, kept making me think of the Fantastic Four literally every time anyone said his name. The movie has a lot of different, relatively famous actors in it, many of whom are not in the film for an exceptionally long period of time, as the vast majority of the film is focused on Glenn Powell's character. Glenn Powell plays a blue-collar father who has been fired from every single job he's ever had just because he gives too much of a shit about human life and the dangerous environments that he is being forced to work in. As we meet him in this film, we discover that he has been blacklisted from hiring because he talked to a union organizer about dangerous radioactive exposure. Glenn Powell's problem, though, is that he has a daughter who is sick, and her fever is not breaking. His child is about to die from what is probably the flu, all because they're too poor for medicine. His wife works at a club as a waitress, and they are struggling to keep their daughter alive. So Glenn Powell does the only thing he can think to do, which is to go audition to be on a bunch of game shows where you can win some money. Apparently, in the future, there's a bunch of shows that do that. However, what he discovers upon auditioning for the shows is he doesn't get to pick which show he's qualified to be on. And the show they pick him for, The Running Man, the one show he specifically did not want to be on. Of course, he ends up taking the offer, he signs the contract, and he does it because it pays the most, and they are willing to give him the money to keep his daughter alive. The film has a lot going on with the illusion of choice in a system that does not truly give you choices. Glenn Powell has been actively forced into this position, and from the way that things play out, it appears evident that most of the people on these shows have in fact been forced into it to a degree. One of the major things that happens is that the show itself, The Running Man, is a piece of corporate propaganda. The people who participate in it are portrayed as social degenerates who don't want to work or are criminals. The thing is that this is not true. This is not a real description of the people who are participating. And Glenn Powell's character specifically tries to lash out and correct the record, but he is almost powerless in the face of the corporate narrative. Much like in The Long Walk, this show is about motivating people to invest in capitalism. In fact, The Long Walk and The Running Man have a lot in common in terms of their social commentary. Now, I will say, if I'm going to fault The Running Man for anything, it is that it is unfortunately comparable to The Long Walk, which is a The Long Walk is a masterpiece. There, I'll say it. The Long Walk is a fucking masterpiece. It is an incredible film. And The Running Man is cool. It's a good time. What I'm saying is that I'm essentially up here talking to you about a movie that I say is roughly an 8 in comparison to a film that is like a 9 or a 10. Now, to be fair, though, there is a reason that some people might choose The Running Man's commentary over The Long Walk's commentary, and that is simply that The Long Walk is not a good time. The Long Walk is an impactful, powerful, emotional movie for people who like a little drama with their social commentary. The Running Man is a action comedy full of all that stuff that makes action comedy a good time. And honestly, Glenn Powell actually successfully carries the movie, which is big news for me because this is actually legitimately the first time I have ever enjoyed Glenn Powell in a movie. Now, in fairness, my major exposures to Glenn Powell are garbage films like Top Gun Maverick. Yeah, I said it. That movie's not great. It has like really cool action scenes, and everything else is a waste of space. I'm sorry. It's empty. It is an empty fucking film. And his other way overrated big Hollywood success, of course, is Twisters, which is so fucking boring. I don't know how you make a movie about tornadoes that is actively boring. But having seen The Running Man, my major thought is now, okay, I get it. I finally enjoyed Glenn Powell in a role, and I can see where his talents lie. Now, in fairness, I have not seen the movies that other people say are Glenn Powell's best movies. Although, in fairness, prior to this, my favorite Glenn Powell movie would be The Dark Knight Rises, where he just plays a stockbroker who gets beat up by Bane, which for a while was my fantasy for Glenn Powell. Except not Bane, just me slamming his head into a table. But now, don't even worry about that, Glenn Powell. I no longer want to punch you in your smarmy, smug face. Because honestly, this worked. And I was rooting for you the whole time. Now, this is apparently a closer adaptation to the book than Arnold Schwarzenegger's film, where Arnold Schwarzenegger was essentially running around combat arenas like American Gladiator. However, in the book and the movie, The Running Man is more of a deal where essentially you are released into the public and therefore have to try and survive for 30 days to earn $1 billion. Glenn Powell, of course, is doing it all for his family. And he also earns money for his family for every goon or hunter that he kills. Goons are, of course, just private police forces. And the hunters are professional killers, led by a hunter named Evan McCoyne, played by Lee Pace. I'm not going to lie, most of the movie he wears a mask, and then there's a part at the end where he takes his mask off. And I'm not going to lie, for some reason I felt like that was going to be a surprise, and then he took his mask off, and I was like, I don't really know who that is. But apparently it's Lee Pace, who does a good job. As one of the antagonists. Josh Brolin plays the main villain of the film, though. Dan Killian, the head of the network, who does a fantastic job of making himself a hateable monster. Like many of the actors in the film, he's not consistently in the film, but that's okay. The film essentially consists of Glenn Powell running around America, coming into contact with people who either want to help or hurt him. And he ends up running into a number of different people. However, fortunately, two of the people he runs into are hardcore revolutionaries, including Daniel Ezra, who plays, I believe the character's name is Bradley Throckman, who secretly runs his own internet show where he essentially is constantly trying to reveal the truth of the network. Interestingly enough, using what appear to be largely videotapes. He then later meets Michael Cera's character, and Michael Cera plays Elton Parakis. Both of these characters are essentially conspiracy theorist propagandists who fight the network. Michael Cera is especially anti-cop because his father, who was a good cop, ended up being murdered by bad cops when he refused to play ball. I think both their characters are great. I always love seeing Michael Cera in films, especially when I haven't seen him for a while. But that's basically the movie. Glen Powell on the run, getting into all types of shenanigans, having to fight people, dealing with stuff. And as he is on the run, poor people start to believe in him and want him to win, while rich people buy into the narrative that he is a crazed, violent lunatic. Thanks to the fact that the network is very good at, doing AI generative content. And that's basically the movie, but it's a good time. I never was bored during The Running Man. Some people complained about the pacing, and maybe the pacing does go a little off the rails in like the last 20 minutes or so. But I'm not actually saying that the movie is 20 minutes too long or anything. Just that during the wrap up phase of the film, you're like, this wrap up phase is more than a few scenes. Now, to be fair, part of this is because the film has deviated from the book's ending, the book having a much more cynical ending, while the movie ends on a more hopeful note. Although, in fairness, because it's Hollywood, I would not be surprised at all if the ending was changed because of the ways in which the book's ending can be compared to 9/11. A thing that Hollywood is consistently uncomfortable with films doing. If you don't believe me, look at how they changed the ending of The Watchmen. Yes, that was a decision made by the studio executives because they didn't want a scene in the film of bodies in the streets of New York. That's why the squid was taken out and replaced with story elements that were actually part of the Darren Aronofsky Watchmen script that was never made. So, how is The Running Man as commentary? Not bad. I mean, it's there. It's all pretty clear. It's all really obvious how this dystopian future is a reflection of our own contemporary society with its pop culture, its reality television, and its people constantly being on their phones. Not bad as commentary. However, it's unavoidable when compared to The Long Walk, which goes fucking hard. The Long Walk is an exceptionally better movie politically and in terms of overall commentary. So that's what it basically comes down to, is this unfortunate comparison for the film. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed The Running Man. However, if what you're looking for is a movie that has strong leftist commentary, then I have to go with The Long Walk over The Running Man. Don't get me wrong, they're both good movies, both entertaining, both with a very strong stance and sort of commentary that they're trying to give to the audience. It's just The Long Walks is better commentary that goes harder and has a deeper subtext than The Running Man, because that's sort of the thing. The Running Man's commentary is pretty is all on the surface. We can see it up front. Its interactions with capitalism are very blatant. The films actually have a number of things in common, of course. The biggest one just being is how these events are these sort of New Rome type events. I think these are both Richard Bachman books, by the way. For those that don't know, those are the Stephen King books that he wrote under the name Richard Bachman when he wanted to write sci-fi because he was afraid it would mess with branding. But eventually everyone realized it was Stephen King and everyone was like, no one cares. We just love Stephen King. Side note, the audio for this might not be as good as normal because I just realized I did not plug in the good microphone. Well, we'll see if I decide to re-record this or not. If you're seeing this part, it means I didn't. At the end of the day, what I'm saying is simply this. This year, 2 great Stephen King movies came out. Actually, more than 2 great Stephen King's movies came out this year. Like, this year is wildly full of Stephen King adaptations on both streaming and film. It's a good year for Stephen King royalty checks, is what I'm saying. The Monkey was good. But when it comes to specifically Stephen King's commentary on capitalism, I have to give the nod to The Long Walk, just because of how hard it goes and the fact that its commentary is actually portrayed in a deeper, more meaningful way. That being said, The Running Man is still a good time. I recommend both movies. I would just have to give the nod to The Long Walk in the weird scenario where you have to absolutely only choose one Stephen King movie to watch this year. If you're only going to watch one Stephen King movie, then it's got to be The Long Walk. I don't know why you'd be in that situation because it seems like an absurd situation to be in. But if you can see two Stephen King movies, then you should also see The Running Man. It's just a good time. Got a colorful cast, and it made me think that Glenn Powell is actually worth watching. And for that, I thank you, Running Man. I don't like being a hater, so if you can make a good movie that makes me stop being a hater, I tip my hat to that. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you've enjoyed my commentary on this film. I know I didn't go as hard as I did for any of my other more recent movie reviews, which is kind of the thing about the movie. Don't get me wrong, it's good. There's probably other things I could commentate on about it. It's just not as good or as commentatable as some of the other films that I've seen this year. So yeah, so please like, subscribe, comment, share your thoughts on this movie. Did you like it better or less than the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie? Should I watch the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie? If you think so, leave that comment. For the love of God, leave some comments. Press the like button, hype, whatever. Help me in the algorithm. YouTube is being... Does the AI know when I'm complaining about the YouTube algorithm? Is it getting revenge? How much of this movie is true to life? Anyways, thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful whatever, wherever, whoever you are.